She walked into the cafe, her eyes scanning the room, but she didn't see him. Not once did she glance in his direction. The smell of freshly brewed coffee and warm pastries filled the air, wrapping around the patrons like a comforting blanket. It was like any other day. People sat sipping their drinks, some chatting livelily while others stared blankly at their screens. But for him, the atmosphere felt heavy, almost suffocating. Jake sat in a corner booth, his heart pounding in his chest. He had chosen this spot deliberately, hoping to be as invisible as possible. He didn't want to disturb her, not again. He remembered how their relationship had once burst with warmth, but now it felt like ice. Sarah had been his everything. They shared laughter, dreams, and countless late-night conversations. But somewhere along the way, something had changed. Each day, he watched Sarah walk in and out of the cafe, her laughter ringing like music. She was always surrounded by her friends, chatting, smiling, and completely unaware of his presence. He would often wonder what had gone wrong. What had he said or done that pushed her away? He longed to reach out to bridge the chasm that had formed between them, but every time he opened his mouth to speak, he found himself frozen, words caught in his throat. That day felt different, though. Something throbbed in the air. Maybe it was the unusual stillness of the cafe, or the way Sarah's laughter sounded more distant than ever. As she sat, her friends around her, he could see the way their interactions seemed to heighten her joy, amplifying the loneliness he felt. Their banter filled the space where their shared whispers once thrived. He felt lost, like he was watching a movie where he once had a leading role and now was just a ghost wandering through someone else's story. As the minutes ticked by, Jake found himself reflecting on the memories they shared, weekends spent wandering through art galleries, rainy afternoons curled up with books, and those perfect moments when it was just the two of them lying on the grass, sharing secrets under the summer sky. He longed for even a tiny glimpse of their past, but all he saw now was a wall, tall and impenetrable, built between them. But then the cafe doors swung open, and in walked a small group of people in uniforms. The barista, a cheerful girl with bright red hair, perked up, waving in their direction. Jake didn't know who they were, why they were dressed that way, but the atmosphere shifted once again. He wondered, his heart skipping a beat. The group made their way to the center of the cafe, and an uneasy tension filled the air. Sarah's smile faltered as she noticed the new arrivals. They gathered, standing tall and proud, and everything about their demeanor commanded attention. With solemn respect, they formed a guard of honor in the midst of the bustling cafe. Jake thought, his heart racing, the curiosity gnawed at him. He watched Sarah's face as she leaned in to listen to her friend's whisper. There was a flicker of surprise in her eyes, then confusion. She stood up, and Jake felt an unfamiliar pang in his chest. Something was shifting. One of the members of the group stepped forward, holding a beautifully framed photograph. He cleared his throat, and the cafe grew quieter as patrons diverted their attention. Jake felt the breath hitch in his throat. The name sounded vaguely familiar, tugging at a memory he couldn't quite grasp. Sarah's face transformed, and she stepped closer to the group. There was a deep sadness swirling in her eyes, but also something else, something Jake couldn't ignore. As the speaker praised the captain's courage, Jake watched the building emotion on Sarah's face. Tears glistened as she reached out to one of the officers, and they embraced tightly. This moment, woven with grief and love, mixed in strange ways with Jake's own heartache. Suddenly, he was reminded of the fragility of life, how quickly things could change. Here he was, caught in the web of his own regrets, while she stood there honoring someone who had given everything. He felt guilty for focusing on his own pain while she carried the weight of a loss so profound. But something was awakening inside him. Perhaps it was the realization that life was too short, that days passed only to be lost forever if he continued to hide. Jake felt a rush of energy as the words of the monument cascaded over him like a wave, washing away the weight of his silence. He didn't want to live in the shadows anymore. As the honor guard finished their tribute, Jake made his way towards Sarah, pushing through the small crowd, his heart pounding fiercely in his chest. Fear wrapped around him tightly, but he couldn't turn back. He reached her just as she pulled away from the embrace, her eyes reflecting both sorrow and strength. "Sarah," he said, his voice trembling slightly but confident. She turned, surprise dancing across her features. Her brow furrowed in confusion. "For not being there, I've missed you," he admitted, feeling a weight lift as he spoke the truth that had smothered him for too long. Her expression shifted, the flicker of pain still present but now mixed with hope. "Jake, it's complicated. Things changed and I didn't know how to handle it. Losing someone changes everything and I didn't know how to reach out." She had finally said the words that had been hanging between them for too long. "I didn't know." Tears pooled in her eyes and Jake could feel his own heart cracking open. "I never stopped wanting to be by your side." He reached out, gently taking her hand, feeling the warmth and the connection stir between them. At that moment, the barriers that had felt so strong began to crumble. Sarah's hand trembled in his. She tightened her grip and pulled him closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "You don't," Jake replied with a fierce intensity. "You never have. I'll be here for you no matter what." As the weight of their shared past hung in the air, surrounded by the echoes of loss and the promise of understanding, they both took a step forward. The cafe buzzed around them, life carrying on despite the grief, but for them, that moment felt suspended in time. And just like that, amidst a guard of honor for someone else's sacrifice, they began to honor their own relationship. Sarah wiped a tear and smiled softly at Jake, something new and delicate knitting them together once again under the harsh lights of the cafe. In the days that followed, they continued to meet. Each conversation was layered with vulnerability, laughter, and reflection. They spoke about fears, dreams, and the changing tides of life. Conversations that once felt heavy became filled with light. Jake learned about Captain Mike Turner from Sarah, how he had encouraged her and built her up during difficult times. The loss was profound, but it drew them closer. It gave their relationship a new perspective, one rooted in honesty and shared support. Jake saw how much strength Sarah had, how she carried the weight of her memories while still daring to hope. And with every shared moment, he could feel the distance between them shrinking, reshaping into something beautiful. Occasionally, they would return to the cafe, remembering that day. The small corner booth still sat open, a witness to their journey. They would talk about the honor guard and the impact it had on them both. Life, they realized, was filled with moments that could change everything with just a whisper or a glance, moments that reminded them of love, loss, and the importance of reaching out. One evening, as they sat together with coffees in hand, Sarah looked at Jake with bright eyes. "You know, I thought I was lost forever. But you brought me back," she said softly. "And you brought me back too. I'm so grateful for that day," he replied, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. The warmth between them pulsed and sparked, igniting the long-lost connection they had feared would stay buried. As laughter spilled between them, the lingering shadows of past pain didn't disappear, but they felt lighter, less daunting. They both knew they could face them together. And that promise of facing whatever life threw their way resonated deeply within them. That cafe was no longer just a place filled with lingering memories. It had transformed into a symbol of hope and new beginnings. Within its walls, they had learned to cherish their bond and the beauty of second chances. The stories they would carry forward were not just tales of loss, but of finding each other again in the most unexpected of moments. And therein lay the magic of life. Sometimes it took the darkness to illuminate the most profound connections that had always been there, waiting just beneath the surface. The air was thick with a tension so heavy, you could almost feel it crackling like static. It was just another Tuesday morning at the bustling downtown cafe, where the aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the sweet scent of pastries. Amid laughter and chatter, something extraordinary was about to unfold, something that would shatter the routine of the ordinary. Jake sat at the back, nursing a cup of cold coffee. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, glancing at the front door every few seconds. He waited for Sarah, his heart racing, caught in an emotional storm. Today marked 2 months since their last meaningful conversation, 2 long months swallowed by silence and shadows. He watched her walk in, her hair catching the sunlight as she entered. Time seemed to pause when she stepped through that door. She brushed past him without a glance, as if he were just another piece of furniture in the cafe. Jake's chest tightened. Where had they gone wrong? Memories stormed through his mind, happy days filled with laughter, wild adventures, and late-night talks that stretched until dawn. He missed her, but more painfully, he felt invisible to her. Sitting in that booth, Jake's heart sank deeper. She sat 5 tables away, surrounded by her friends, their laughter echoing like a haunting reminder of what he had lost. They were easy and carefree, a shining example of the camaraderie he once shared with Sarah. He could feel the distance between them like a chasm, vast and forbidding. As the minutes wore on, something shifted in the cafe. A group of uniformed personnel walked in, a mix of police officers and firefighters. Their presence drew curious glances from the regulars. Jake raised an eyebrow, wondering what was happening. The officers stood tall, talking quietly among themselves, but it was clear that their purpose was serious. The murmurs in the cafe grew louder as people became aware that something significant was about to happen. The warm atmosphere was now laced with anticipation. Jake leaned forward, his heart quickening. What were they here for? Suddenly, one of the officers stepped forward, his face serious. He raised his hand for silence, effectively clearing the air of chatter. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice firm yet respectful, "today we honor a true hero who has served our community with incredible dedication and bravery." At the mention of the name, a wave of emotion surged through Jake. He understood the impact of such words. He watched as the assembled officers created a guard of honor, forming 2 lines that framed the entrance like towering sentinels. His heart raced as the gravity of the moment sank in. Jake turned his gaze back to Sarah. Her laughter faltered, replaced by a solemn expression that mirrored a wave of compassion for the man being honored. The transformation in her demeanor was palpable. The warmth that had once been shared between them flickered in her eyes again, snuffed out for so long but now rekindled by the homage being paid. As the ceremony unfolded, Jake felt an unfamiliar sensation swell within him, almost like a spark igniting a flame. He could see the pride flooding Sarah's face as she observed the officers conducting their tribute. Perhaps this was the moment he had been waiting for, his chance to break free from the chains of solitude. He rose, his legs shaking slightly as he fought against the fear that gripped him. He instinctively moved toward the center of the cafe, edging closer to Sarah. She didn't notice him at first, her gaze focused solely on the tribute. Jake could see her blinking back tears, and it filled him with a strange sense of hope. The officer continued, telling tales of Officer Reynolds' brave acts, heart-stopping moments where saving lives had come at his own expense. As the stories unfolded, Jake felt an aching in his heart for not just the fallen hero but for Sarah, as if he had let her slip away in the midst of his own struggles. The moment hit its climax when the officer presented a flag to Officer Reynolds' family, a final act of honoring his service. When the flag unfurled, a hush settled over the café. The surrender of that modest fabric was filled with so much emotion. It embodied not just a life lived well, but love and sacrifice wrapped into an emblem of bravery. As the family stood there, Jake's heart painfully pulsed with recognition. How often had he overlooked the love and moments he could share with Sarah? He felt an unshakable urge to reach for her, to bridge the gap that had formed. Finally, he leaned closer to Sarah, taking a chance that felt both terrifying and exhilarating. "Sarah," he whispered, and it was as if the weight of the world had shifted ever so slightly. She turned, surprised to see him standing there, close enough to touch. "Jake," she said, her voice softer than he remembered. Curiosity flickered in her eyes, mingling with the remnants of sorrow that had crafted their solitude. "I'm so sorry," he began, urgency swelling in his heart. "I thought giving you space would help, but I see now I was wrong. I never meant to drift away." In that moment, a barrier broke. For the first time in weeks, Sarah's lips curled into the beginnings of a smile, trembling with vulnerability. "Missed you too," she admitted, her voice barely audible over the remnants of applause that filled the café. The officers concluded their ceremony, honoring not just a fallen hero, but the bonds that formed through shared experiences of love and loss. Jake knew then that they could choose to honor their own connection, to stand together against whatever challenges lay ahead. Taking a deep breath, he stepped closer, compelled by invisible strings connecting their hearts. "I don't want to be a ghost in your life anymore." Her eyes shimmered with unspoken emotions as she took a step forward to meet him halfway. "You're not a ghost, Jake, you're still here. The air thickened again between them, buzzing with possibilities. He could see it, how a future stretched out before them, filled with the promise of healing, laughter, and uncharted paths. As more people began to filter out of the café, Sarah and Jake lingered, wrapped in their own world. They could talk about how each story resonated deep within them, how life sometimes thrusts us into shadows but still gives us the chance to emerge into light. Suddenly, the café felt smaller and much more intimate. The noise faded into the background, leaving just the two of them, determined to rediscover what had been lost. "Let's grab lunch," he suggested, excitement bubbling up like soda fizz. She nodded, and the spark of connection ignited into something more substantial. They strolled outside, the sun warming their skin as they walked side by side. The world seemed brighter, more vibrant. Each step drew them closer to a new beginning, igniting passions they thought had dimmed. Together, they navigated through the bustling streets, their conversations ebbing and flowing, laughter punctuating moments of vulnerability. It felt surreal, almost like they'd been given a chance to rewrite their story together. And then, as if touched by fate, Jake reached for Sarah's hand. It felt familiar and right, like slipping into the rhythm of a dance they both understood but had forgotten. She glanced at him, eyes wide with a mixture of surprise and warmth, and then they smiled, an unspoken agreement that they were both ready to move forward. In that moment, they realized that sometimes connections can take a backseat to the chaos of life, but they never truly disappear. They can be reignited, rekindled like a flame waiting for the slightest breath of fresh air. The Guard of Honor had not just celebrated a hero, it had illuminated their hearts, reminding them of what was truly important, the bonds they had once forged and the courage to fix what had been broken. As they walked into the unknown together, Jake felt a sense of peace settle and a quiet assurance that they would no longer ignore each other's presence. The cafe door swung open, and the bustling room fell quiet, a collective breath held in anticipation. In walked a group of military personnel, a mix of fatigue and honor etched across their faces. Behind them, a man walked slowly, a ghost of the vibrant spirit he once was. His name was Mark, and at that moment everything changed in the small cafe. Many patrons were unaware of the turmoil swirling around him as he entered, but the staff knew. They had accepted the unspoken challenge to honor the bravery of a fallen comrade. Unbeknownst to Mark, people had gathered to celebrate his return, one filled with hardship, sacrifice, and a powerful story worth sharing, a story he had kept locked away. As he stepped further in, Mark lowered his head, feeling invisible despite being surrounded by people. The laughter of friends teetered on the edge of his consciousness, but it didn't reach him. Over the past few months, loneliness had enveloped him like a heavy blanket. He'd returned from deployment, a tumultuous journey that left him scarred in ways that no bandage could heal. At a booth near the back, Sarah sat with her friends, laughter spilling from her lips, cascading over the tables like shimmering light. She hadn't seen Mark enter. She hadn't felt the chill that enveloped him. It hung heavily in the air, a stark contrast to her carefree spirit. He had used to bring her joy, each moment with him felt vibrant and alive, but now she felt nothing besides a distant ache that she didn't know how to address. Mark shuffled to the counter, scanning the menu but seeing only blurred shapes. The barista greeted him, her voice warm and inviting, but he struggled to respond. The weight of what he carried made even the simplest interactions feel monumental. He half listened as she prepared his drink, his mind lost in a spiraling whirlwind of thoughts. He glanced toward Sarah, who finally noticed him standing there like an apparition from her past life. For a flicker of a second, their eyes locked, and then she looked away, her laughter returning, leaving Mark feeling unseen and unheard. The hurt slipped through his chest like shards of glass. Was it always going to be this way? He had once filled her heart, but now it felt like an iron door had slammed shut between them. She had been his anchor, someone who embraced his flaws, but after his return he resigned himself to the shadows, believing she had moved on without him. Maybe she had, but as Mark took his drink and turned to find a seat, the atmosphere shifted. The room buzzed with whispers as the uniformed personnel settled into place. One of them, a tall woman with a stern yet compassionate face, stepped forward and raised her hand for silence. Mark's heart raced. Was this for him? "Today we are here to honor Sergeant Mark Thompson," she said, her voice steady, filling the cafe with purpose. It seemed to draw everyone's attention. "Mark has served our country honorably, facing challenges that many cannot comprehend." Gasps filled the room and Sarah's laughter faded to nothing. Mark felt the weight of the words wash over him, yet an unfamiliar pang of discomfort blossomed within. He wasn't a hero. He was just a man returning from a war that had unraveled his identity. But as the officer spoke further, detailing the valor displayed in battle, something shifted within the walls of his solitude. For the first time in months, he felt a flicker of recognition, not just of himself, but of a life he longed to reclaim. As the officer described specific acts of bravery, Mark's heart pounded. People applauded, their hands coming together in unison, creating a standing ovation that he struggled to absorb. He could see tears glistening in Sarah's eyes, reflecting the sorrow of loss, the hope for healing, and perhaps a touch of regret. In that moment, amid the applause, she rose from the booth and walked toward him, and he felt a mixture of fear and hope blooming inside him. "Mark," she said, her voice trembling as she approached. He struggled to find his voice. "Yeah." The words felt heavy, weighed down with the unspoken grief of all that had transmuted in their lives. Clarity seemed to flood the moment, washing over them both like a vibrant hue. Looking into her eyes, he saw the past, the warmth and laughter they had once shared. But another layer formed there, the pain of silence, the ache of misunderstanding. "Why didn't you reach out?" she faltered, emotion catching in her throat, leaving behind a rawness that mirrored his own. "I didn't want to burden you," Mark replied, his voice barely above a whisper. The admission rang out, heavy yet liberating. The truth cast a light on the unspoken fears that had kept them apart. As if sensing that they were the focal point of this emotional storm, the cafe staff lined up in a perfect guard of honor, creating an opening between them. It felt as though the universe was conspiring to lift the weight off their shoulders, pulling them closer together in their shared vulnerability. The officer placed a crisp flag into Mark's hands, a symbol of his service and a reminder of everything he had endured. "This belongs to you," she said. "Your courage has inspired so many, including those you love." Sarah reached for his arm, her fingers brushing against his sleeve. "You're not invisible, Mark, not to me." Mark looked at her, the flicker in her eyes illuminating a path forward. With a shaking breath, he stepped closer. "I don't deserve this," he murmured, gesturing toward the flag. "Everyone deserves to be seen," she replied, her voice steady. "Especially our heroes who come home changed. Let me help you, Mark." As their words formed a bridge spanning the distance created by silence, Mark gathered his strength. This moment would be the foundation for rebuilding. He had once been terrified of sharing his burdens, but the air felt different now. He asked, his voice resolute yet gentle. A smile broke across her face, one that felt like sunshine breaking through clouds, a promise of something brighter. As they stepped out of the cafe into the warm embrace of the evening, Mark felt the last remnants of isolation begin to fade away. Laughter and shared glances ignited the joy that had once flourished between them. The remnants of the guard of honor faded into the background, but the significance of the moment remained etched in their hearts. They strolled through the park, the golden hues of sunset casting soft shadows on the ground. Each step brought with it a weight lifting from their shoulders, a collective letting go of the fears that had grown unspoken. As they wandered past trees, their leaves swaying in the gentle breeze, Mark took a deep breath. In there, I felt alive again. "I'm glad," Sarah replied, her eyes reflecting sincerity. "You deserve to be celebrated, Mark. Your journey has shaped you, but it doesn't define you." They found a bench tucked beneath one of the old oaks, its branches sheltering them like a comforting embrace. The world felt simpler there, removed from the chaos of life's complexities. "I've been trying to escape my memories, trying to bury what I've seen. It's like I have two lives, one before the war and one after." "I don't know how to merge them," Mark confessed, vulnerability threading through his voice. "You don't have to do it alone," Sarah said softly. "It's okay to share those memories, the hard ones too. It's part of who you are." He could feel her sincerity washing over him, and this time he allowed himself to believe in the possibility that healing could come from connection. Is it too much to ask for second chances? Not at all, she said, warmth suffusing her face. As long as we're willing to be honest, we can rebuild it together. As they talked, the golden hour slipped softly into twilight, wrapping around them like a comforting shawl. The weight of the evening began to lift, laughter bubbled between them, thoughts poured forth unfiltered, and the things left unspoken began to find their voice. In that sacred space beneath the trees, they began to reclaim those pieces of themselves, flaws, scars, and stories, woven together in honesty. As the stars began to twinkle overhead, they both knew that this was just the beginning. They may have been lost in silence for too long, but they found their way back through the bond of shared experiences, understanding, and a warmth that only true connection could ignite. The echoes of the guard of honor faded as new beginnings blossomed. And together they stepped into the unknown, ready to face whatever came next, with courage, heart, and a determination to hold on to each other through all of life's battles. The cafe door swung open with a jingle, and the room fell into a hush. Every face turned toward the entrance, but one stood out among the rest, a tall man in military dress, his presence commanding attention. His name was Ethan, and although he was back in his hometown, he felt worlds away. He walked slowly, absorbing the ambience of laughter and camaraderie that swirled around him like a distant melody. It was as if the warmth of the cafe was a soft blanket, but he felt utterly cold inside. He'd returned from deployment, weary and scarred in ways unseen. The joyous atmosphere that enveloped the patrons felt foreign to him. Where was the excitement he had once felt about coming home? As Ethan settled into a booth in the corner, he noticed Hermia, the girl he had loved deeply. She sat at a table with her friends, laughter spilling from her lips, vibrant and carefree. But when her eyes drifted in his direction, a flicker of recognition passed across her face before she turned away, the laughter returning. His heart sank. This wasn't how it was meant to be. They had shared so many dreams, whispered secrets under the stars, and yet now they were worlds apart. How had they gone from promises of forever to this hollow separation? Ethan had always hoped she would be there when he returned, but she had closed that door, seemingly ignoring his presence. Ethan sat alone, nursing a cold cup of coffee as feelings of despair crept in. What had happened to their bond, memories of their last summer together flooded his mind. They'd spent lazy days together, painting sunsets and making future plans, blissfully unaware of the shadow that war would cast over them. But today was different. Something stirred in the air, a sense of impending change. He noticed staff members whispering to one another, an unusual sense of urgency rippling through the cafe. It felt electric, charged with emotion like the calm before a storm. Suddenly the door opened again and a group of uniformed personnel walked in, their demeanor respectful yet solemn. Employees and patrons alike paused, unsure of what to expect. Ethan couldn't help but raise his head. His heart raced with a strange mix of apprehension and curiosity. As the group gathered near the entrance, the barista, her eyes wide with emotion, made her way to the center of the cafe. She called out, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. Ethan stared as the group of military personnel formed a guard of honor, their expressions painted with pride and respect. The barista continued, "Today we honor our own." Gasps filled the room, followed by a rising tide of applause. Ethan felt the weight of their recognition settle on him, but even as people clapped, he felt a pang of confusion wash over him. Why were they celebrating him? In his mind, he hadn't done anything special. He was just a man who had done his duty. He glanced at Maya again, who stood frozen at her table, her friends still buzzing with excitement. In that moment, their eyes locked once more. Her laughter faded, replaced by a depth of emotion he hadn't seen in a long time. The sound of applause filled his ears, but everything else seemed to fade away. The officer stepped forward, her voice resonating with authority. "Today, we celebrate courage." Tension hung heavy in the air as Ethan felt the spotlight envelop him. It was both exhilarating and terrifying. He had spent the past few months trying to build barriers around his feelings, convinced that he was unworthy of affection. But as the tears welled in his eyes, he realized this was a moment to reclaim who he was, a moment to open himself to the love that had always surrounded him, even if it felt distant now. Maya stepped closer to the gathering, her lips trembling. "Ethan," she breathed, breaking through the noise. Before she could finish, the officer continued, "Ethan, your bravery in the face of adversity has not gone unnoticed." She approached him, her hand extended, offering a flag that bore the weight of gratitude and sacrifice. "This belongs to you," she declared. Shock rippled through Ethan. He extended his hands to accept the flag, its softness contrasting sharply with the weight of emotion swirling inside him. "I don't deserve this," he murmured, his voice raw with humility. "Of course you do," Maya said softly, stepping closer, her eyes shimmering. As the ceremony continued, Ethan felt an unexpected warmth wash over him, igniting something deeper inside. He had spent the past few months trying to keep his distance, locked away behind walls of his own making. But now, as he held the flag, it felt as if those walls were crumbling, giving way to a sense of belonging he hadn't felt in ages. Sarah, one of the cafe's regulars, stood nearby, whispering to her friends. Her voice trailed off. The officer continued, weaving tales of Ethan's bravery, recounting moments that marked his character's selflessness in the face of danger, unwavering loyalty to his comrades. The pride that filled the room grew palpable. It was overwhelming in the best way. For the first time, Ethan realized he was part of something greater again, a community that stood behind him. As the final applause echoed in the cafe, Maya reached out, hesitating for just a moment. Her voice was a whisper, but the urgency behind it brought a rush of adrenaline. They stepped away from the crowd, the chatter fading into the background like a distant song. "I didn't know you were back." She hesitated, searching for the right words, pain evident in her eyes. "You didn't ignore me," he said, feeling more like himself with each word. "I wanted to shield you from what I went through." Her gaze softened. "But I've missed you. I didn't understand why you shut me out." Ethan could see the hurt behind her words, and it stabbed at his heart. Maya took a step closer, her voice firm. "Ethan, you don't have to shield me. I want to help you carry those memories to understand." So there they stood, two souls on the brink of something life-changing. The applause still echoed softly in the distance, but their world had narrowed into just the two of them, surrounded by emotions that swirled like a storm. "I thought I lost you," he admitted, his voice wavering. "The truth is, you're my anchor, Maya." Surprise danced in her eyes, and he felt a flicker of hope rise within him. They were both standing on the precipice of something extraordinary, a chance to mend the fractures that had formed in their relationship. As the world buzzed around them with life, they ventured back into the cafe, hand in hand, feeling the invisible threads binding them tighter. Patrons were still congratulating Ethan, smiles painted across the faces that surrounded them. Yet for him, everything felt different now because Maya was beside him, reclaiming those moments that had slipped away. Sometimes it takes a catalyst, a guard of honor, community coming together, to shine a light on what truly matters. In that cafe, with hearts racing and spirits soaring, they found the courage to face not just the past but the future. With renewed energy, Ethan turned to face the room. Each person there represented a part of him he fought to rediscover, a part that reminded him he was worthy of love, laughter, and joy. The shadows of war might linger, but in that moment with Maya by his side, he felt stronger, more connected to his very essence. After the gathering concluded, they found themselves seated once more, this time together at a small table by the window where the sun poured in, washing over them with warmth and hope. Maya asked, gently squeezing his hand. "Yeah, let's do it," he replied, his heart swelling with gratitude. Together they began to rewrite their story. Over steaming coffee, they shared their lives over the past months, unfiltered and raw. Each laugh that slipped between them mended a bond that had seemed tenuous but was finding its way back, stronger than ever. As the conversation flowed, Ethan felt the weight of his struggles begin to lift. Each moment spent with Maya was like sunshine breaking through clouds, illuminating the path forward. Later, as they left the cafe, the setting sun cast a golden hue over everything, and he felt a sense of peace settle within. They stepped boldly into the evening together, ready to face whatever lay ahead, armed not just with love, but with resilience, understanding, and a beautiful willingness to embrace life in all its chaotic glory. And as they walked into the horizon hand in hand, Ethan realized he was no longer just a soldier. He was a man surrounded by those who cared, ready to reclaim his life and love fully again. The cafe door swung open with a soft jingle, and the atmosphere crackled with anticipation. A group of uniformed service members entered, their presence immediately shifting the energy in the room. Laughter and clinking cups faded into a hush, eyes drawn toward these bears of honor. Among them was a man named Alex, whose heart thudded beneath the weight of expectations he thought had vanished the day he left for deployment. He stepped forward slowly, the familiar sense of coffee and baked goods swirling around him, mingling uneasily with the fear gnawing at his insides. This was supposed to be home, a place of solace, but instead it felt like a stage, and he was the reluctant centerpiece. The cafe was busy, filled with patrons laughing and chatting, unaware of the heaviness he carried. How could they possibly know that he felt like a ghost roaming through his own life? He searched for a familiar face amidst the crowd, and then he saw her, Lily, his best friend, sitting with her group of friends at a table near the front. For a brief moment, their eyes met. Her gaze flickered over him, and then she turned back to her conversation, the laughter consuming her attention. It stung, sharp and fresh, like a wound opened anew. How had they arrived at this point? They had shared everything, one's dreams, heartaches, hopes, but now he felt like a stranger bound by a past that seemed to hold no place for him. Just breathe, he told himself, pulling his thoughts back to the moment. He walked toward the counter, trying not to seem too consumed by the shadows of doubt. The barista, a bright-eyed woman with a warm smile, greeted him. She asked cheerfully. Alex mumbled something about an espresso, his voice barely rising above a whisper. It felt strange to be here, to engage with people who were so full of life while he felt like he was slipping away. As she prepared his drink, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was drifting further into obscurity. As he looked around, the sights and sounds of the cafe enveloped him. He couldn't help but think of the last time he was here, the laughter, the plans, the endless dreams he and Lily used to share. What had changed? Was it the distance, the time spent away from each other, or had he simply faded from her memory? The door swung open again, and this time a military officer stepped in, his commanding presence causing the room to shift once more. He approached the barista and exchanged quick words that sparked curiosity at tables nearby. A ripple of anticipation coursed through the cafe, and the air felt charged like before a storm. Alex wondered. Suddenly the officer raised his hand, calling for attention. The murmuring died down and all eyes turned to him. He said, his voice deep and resonant. Gasps erupted, followed by applause that resonated like a thunderous wave. Alex stood frozen, feeling the warmth of their appreciation wash over him, but it felt foreign. Why were they applauding him? He hadn't done anything heroic. He was just a soldier, following orders amidst chaos and confusion. But as the officer continued to speak about his bravery, recounting the harrowing moments that had defined his service, Alex felt something shift within him. The stories told were not just events, they were slices of life that had shaped him, painful, beautiful, transformative. Lily's eyes widened as she stood up, her friends' conversations hushed. Alex could feel her shock from across the room. She stepped forward, drawn toward the commotion like a moth to a flame, although it was somehow more than just curiosity. He noticed the concern etching itself across her features. It was a look he hadn't seen in a long time, a mixture of admiration and something deeper. As the officer spoke, he described the moments when Alex had stood his ground against overwhelming odds, moments when he had put his life on the line for others. For a fleeting moment, Alex could see himself through the eyes of the people around him, not just as a soldier, but as a human being marked by his experiences. When the officer paused, a weighty silence filled the air, and Alex felt every gaze boring into him, leaving him exposed and vulnerable. "I do not deserve this," he whispered, half to himself, half to the universe. The weight of expectations pressed down on him. He had not come back as a hero, but as a man trying to find his footing. And then unexpectedly, the officers formed a guard of honor, creating an opening for him, weaving a path through the crowd that seemed both imposing and inviting. The barista placed the espresso in front of him, a small and mundane comfort in the midst of monumental chaos. He turned and caught a glimpse of Lily's tear-streaked face, her expression shifting from disbelief to something deeper, something that felt like hope. "Alex," she said, her voice breaking through the emotional haze, I didn't know if I wanted to," he admitted, his voice laced with honesty. Everything changed. A spark ignited in her eyes. "Why didn't you reach out?" He searched her gaze, feeling the weight of the past heavy on his chest. He gestured around, indicating the familiar yet foreign café. As the moment hung between them, Alex felt the public applause fade into the background. It was just the two of them standing there, the memories of their shared past swirling in the air like smoke, clinging to the edges of their connection. "You've always mattered to me, Lily," he confessed, stepping closer. Her expression softened, words leaping to the surface, but she remained silent, caught in a tumult of emotion. The officer took a step back, allowing Alex to step into the spotlight. "You are not alone," he repeated, his voice steady. Glancing at Lily, Alex realized he needed to break down the barriers he had built around himself. He asked softly, rushing to bridge the gap that had formed between them. They moved to the quieter corner of the cafe, surrounded by the warmth of folks celebrating the moment. There was still laughter, the light chatter of patrons spinning a web of comfort around them. But he was acutely aware of the space between himself and Lily, a chasm filled with unspoken words. She held his gaze, her warmth igniting a flicker of courage within him. She said, gesturing to where the guards had stood, "Why didn't you tell me? I thought you'd be better off without me," he said, a tremor in his voice. Her eyes filled with determination. "But I'd rather face that darkness with you." His heart raced at her fervent words. "I didn't realize you wanted to share that burden, I just thought." Hard. As they exchanged words, the weight began to lift. Inside, he felt the stirrings of something powerful, the promise of rediscovery, the chance to heal from the scars he had kept hidden. The past could not be rewritten, but they were standing at the threshold of something new together. "Just thought you'd moved on," he admitted with a tremor. "Moved on, I've missed you every day." A brief silence enveloped them as friendships and connections that had once been seamless hung precariously in the balance, but the air between them grew warmer, crackling with the energy of rekindled affection. Alex's voice barely cracked the surface, filled with the hope that had long been buried beneath layers of doubt. Lily didn't hesitate, the vulnerability in her eyes glimmered with warmth and understanding. She exclaimed, her voice suffused with emotion, "But it won't be easy." Her declaration filled Alex with a surge of relief and determination. Maybe it wouldn't be easy, maybe it would take time and effort, but the bond they shared had never truly shattered. It had simply been waiting for the right moment to reignite. As the cafe continued to hum around them, Alex glanced at the gathering crowd who were slowly returning to their conversations, yet their energy felt intertwined with his and Lily's. The supportive presence of the community enveloped them like a warm embrace, urging them forward. In that moment, Alex realized how much they all mattered, those who had come to celebrate him and honor his sacrifices, but most importantly, those who stood firm beside him in the aftermath. and he couldn't allow himself to drift away into the shadows again. As he took Lily's hand, he felt the connection solidify, a promise not just to himself but to each other. Together they would navigate the tumultuous waters ahead, anchored in a shared understanding of both love and pain. "Let's get out of here," he suggested, an adventurous glimmer in his eye. Lily grinned, the light returning to her face. "Anywhere but here." He watched her dart to the counter, a burst of enthusiasm in her movements. She was a reminder of what it looked like to reclaim life, to embrace joy despite the trials faced in their paths. As he waited, Alex couldn't fully express the gratitude that bubbled in his chest. How had he forgotten that life was woven from the threads of connection and support? It wasn't as though the battles he faced on deployment had stripped him of who he was. Rather, those experiences had shaped him into something new, something he hoped would be stronger. When she returned, coffee in hand and a bright smile on her face, she reached for his other hand. "More than ready," he replied, their fingers intertwining as if they were meant to fit together all along. The cafe flickered into the background like a scene from a faded dream, and together they stepped into the world outside, a renewed sense of purpose coursing through them. The sun hung low on the horizon, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink, casting a warm glow over everything. And as they walked away hand in hand, Alex realized they were not just moving toward a future. They were embracing a shared journey, a promise to face whatever challenges lay ahead, illuminated by the strength of their revived bond, reverberating with the rhythm of hope, healing, and love. The cafe door swung open, and the atmosphere shifted in an instant, as if the world outside had forgotten to hold its breath. In walked a line of military personnel, their crisp uniforms contrasting sharply with the casual attire of the patrons. Among them was Jake, his gait slow but steady, a soldier fresh from the battlefield, carrying both invisible scars and unshakable memories. As he entered, the low hum of conversation dimmed into an odd silence. Jake felt the eyes of strangers upon him, faces reflecting everything from curiosity to respect. But there was one face he searched for, one smile that had once brought him warmth amid chaos. There she was, Emily, his closest friend, seated at a corner table, laughing, unaware of the storm brewing just a few steps away. Jake's heart sank as he watched her smile, bright and carefree, framed by her golden hair. He remembered the days before he left, sharing dreams and secrets, their laughter echoing through the night. But now an unbridgeable gap stretched between them, filled with unspoken words and painful memories. Stood frozen, watching her, wishing things could return to how they once were, but he felt like a ghost, an echo of the man he used to be. Months of combat training and the grueling weight of his experiences had left him hollow. As he walked to the counter to order, he tried to shake off the isolation wrapping around him like a heavy cloak. The barista smiled warmly and prepared his drink, but Jake could only offer a distracted nod. When he collected his coffee, he turned again toward Emily's table. This time their eyes briefly locked. Something flickered in her gaze, surprise perhaps, but then it vanished just as quickly, overshadowed by the laughter of her friends who didn't seem to notice that he was back. Jake's heart pounded in his chest, a mix of longing and sorrow ripping through him. He wanted to shout her name to bridge the silence that had crept between them like an unwelcome shadow. But what could he say? After weeks of silence and hurt, was it too late? Suddenly the door swung open again, and a higher-ranking officer strode in, calling for attention with a sharp, commanding presence. All eyes turned to him. Jake felt a spark of hope igniting within him as the officer continued. Jake's stomach churned. He didn't feel like a hero. He hadn't saved lives, he had watched friends fall. But as the officer spoke of his deeds, his determination in the face of overwhelming odds, his loyalty to his brothers in arms, Jake felt a strange mixture of pride and discomfort. As if pulled by an invisible thread, the crowd began to applaud, breaking the silence like a wave. And then he noticed Emily, her laughter gone, replaced by wide eyes and a pink flush in her cheeks. She stood, drawn closer but hesitant, as if the weight of everything unsaid had suddenly crashed down on her. In a matter of moments, the staff formed a guard of honor, creating a pathway for Jake to walk through. With each step, he felt more exposed than ever before. Why were they doing this for him? He wanted to vanish, to retreat back to the shadows. But those moments of recognition felt like a lifeline, pulling him from his despair. When the officer stepped back, Jake stood in the spotlight, feeling the warmth of the community. Although he feared facing the crowd, he wanted to believe in their support. Was he ready to face this new chapter in his life? "Thank you for your service, Sergeant," the officer said firmly, placing a flag into Jake's hands. It was a symbol of sacrifice, a reminder of the challenges he had faced, but it felt heavier than it looked. The applause continued, with familiar faces in the crowd, some smiling while others had tears in their eyes. Jake scanned the cafe, but all he saw was Emily, her expression captured between admiration and a complex mix of emotions he couldn't decipher. Then their eyes met again. The moment felt electric, charged with the weight of everything unspoken. He took a deep breath, stepping forward. As if drawn by an unseen force, she stepped away from her friends, crossing the cafe until she was in front of him. "Jake," she began, but he held up a hand, desperate to break free from the confusion. "I didn't want you to see me like this," he admitted, the vulnerability spilling from him like a stream. A flicker of sadness crossed her face. "Easier for who? You're not just a soldier, you're my friend, and I've missed you." Jake felt the walls he had built around his heart begin to crack. "I thought maybe you'd moved on while I was away." "Move on? Never," Emily said fiercely. "You've been one of the most important people in my life, and I thought you were gone for good." The torrent of emotions crashing around them was almost overwhelming. The words hung in the air, tasting sweet and bitter all at once. In that moment, Jake realized he had robbed himself of what truly mattered, his connection to her, to everything he had once cherished. He clasped the flag tighter, the fabric grounding him amid the rising tide of vulnerability. "I'm back now," he said, voice steadying. "I want to rebuild what we had to start fresh." The sincerity in his eyes seemed to spark a light in hers. "We can face this together, Jake," she replied, determination filling her voice, "but you have to let me in." In that bittersweet moment, a wave of hope washed over him. Maybe they could bridge the distance that had grown between them, but it wouldn't be easy. Healing rarely was. As the crowd began to disperse, Jake and Emily stepped aside, allowing the celebrations to fade into the background. They found a quieter corner of the cafe, the chaos of the world outside suddenly feeling miles away. "Tell me everything," she urged gently, her expression softening. Jake swallowed hard, drawing from a reservoir of memories he had kept buried. He wanted to be honest. "I saw things I can't unsee, friends I can't forget." "You've changed," she replied, her voice soothing as she leaned closer. He felt his walls start to crumble, slowly revealing pieces of the man he had been buried beneath layers of anguish and silence. "I felt like a ghost for so long." Her eyes held him captive, filled with a fierce determination. "And we'll face it together. You're not a burden, you're a part of this community, this life." Those words held a power he hadn't realized he needed. The love and friendship they had shared once burned brightly, but he had let doubt extinguish the flame. "We lost so much time," he lamented, his voice breaking a touch. "Time is something we can't control, but this moment we can take it and run with it," Emily urged, her voice like a guiding star in a restless night. Jake inhaled deeply, looking at her at the warmth radiating from her spirit. She reached out, squeezing his hand tightly. "Always, Jake." They felt the weight of the uncharted journey ahead, their connection offering a beam of light amid the darkness. The sincerity in her eyes reaffirmed his purpose, a promise to seek healing and connection. In that small cafe where applause had once rung loud, they both forged a new chapter. No longer bound by the ghosts of their past, they chose to embrace the present, a commitment echoing with the understanding that their love could withstand the trials yet to come. Time dripped slowly in the cafe, moments melding into memories as they sat together, sharing stories, laughter, and tears. They were stepping forward together, hand in hand, willing to face whatever came next head-on. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, bathing the world in a soothing glow, Jake felt the fears and doubts that had once haunted him begin to lift. He was home, not just in the cafe, but in Emily's unwavering belief in what they could become. Their journey would be filled with challenges and triumphs, but they knew one thing together: nothing would remain unaddressed, no shadow too formidable to face. Guided by an enduring spirit of connection, they walked forward into the horizon, ready to seize everything this next chapter would bring. The door swung open, and the bustling cafe hushed in an instant, like someone hit the pause button on life. In walked a tall figure dressed in military fatigues. He looked weary but proud, with his hair cropped short and a serious expression on his face. This was Daniel, home from deployment, the air around him filled with an invisible weight. He stepped inside slowly, feet dragging against the tiled floor. As he scanned the room, his heart sank. There she was, Emma, sitting at a table with friends, her laughter ringing like a bell. It was a sound that used to fill his heart with warmth, but today it only deepened the chasm between them. She hadn't noticed him yet, and for a moment he wondered if he should just turn around and walk back out. But then a small flicker of determination surged through him. He had fought for his country, faced down uncertainty and fear, yet here he was, paralyzed by the thought of reaching out to someone he once held so close. He had been back for weeks, yet their conversations had dwindled into silence. The bond they once shared felt strained, like an old, forgotten song that no one remembered how to sing. Taking a deep breath, Daniel walked to the counter, trying to muster a smile for the barista who cheerfully greeted him. She asked, her enthusiasm almost jarring. He simply nodded, ordering a coffee without really paying attention to the words tumbling from his mouth. As he turned to find a seat, he glanced back at Emma. This time their eyes met. The initial surprise crossing her face was quickly replaced by discomfort. In that fleeting moment, something inside him shattered. She looked away, returning to her friends, laughter resuming as if he'd never existed. Like a shadow fading into the background, a wave of anguish crashed over him. He had expected it to be different. He thought that they could pick up where they left off. But maybe he had been wrong. Maybe the distance created during his time away had built barriers too high to scale. Each day had felt like an uphill battle, and now he was back, standing at the foot of those walls alone. Just as his resolve began to wane again, the door swung open for the third time. This time it was a group of military personnel, their demeanor serious yet respectful. Daniel recognized the officer leading them. a commanding figure whose presence filled the room with an air of authority. The officer called out, cutting through the normal cafe chatter. The murmurs quieted, and Daniel felt every eye turn toward the entrance. "We're here to honor a fellow soldier," the officer continued, his voice resonating deep. Daniel felt his throat tighten. Honor? He didn't feel honorable. Memories of the horrors he had witnessed flooded his mind, shadowing any sense of pride he might have felt. But the applause that followed pierced through his haze, gripping his emotions in a way he never anticipated. His chest tightened as the officer stepped forward, still speaking about Daniel's courage, the choices he'd made on the battlefield, the moments of valiant action that had saved lives. Daniel's heart raced, caught in a whirlwind of disbelief. He scanned the room again, and for the first time he saw Emma standing up, eyes wide with surprise. She was stepping closer, drawn in by the gravitational pull of the unfolding moment. Just when he thought it would be too much to bear, he realized she had a look of admiration on her face, a glimmer of respect in her eyes. The officer's words washed over him like music, and slowly the awkwardness began to dissipate. The staff members formed a guard of honor, lining up alongside Daniel, creating a path for him to walk. With each step forward, he felt like he was bridging the distance that had felt insurmountable. This moment was about him, yes, but it also held a promise, a glimmer of hope that he and Emma could find their way back to each other. As he reached the center of the cafe, the applause enveloped him like a warm embrace. He took a moment to gather himself, fighting against the swell of emotions breaking against the dam he had tried so hard to maintain. He felt the weight of the flag, a symbol of duty and sacrifice, placed in his hands. The cheers were louder now, and he caught Emma's gaze once more. She stepped forward, her friends falling away. "Daniel," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "I had no idea." For a moment, the world around them faded away. "I didn't know how to reach you," he admitted, vulnerability tugging at the edges of his heart. "Why didn't you tell me?" she exclaimed, eyes shimmering as she clenched her fists. "I thought." Daniel felt the walls he had built around himself start to crack. "I thought you'd moved on." The confession slipped out before he could stop it, raw and unfiltered. She shook her head as if his words cut her deeply. "You were never a burden to me, Daniel." In that moment, amidst the applause and the warm glow of recognition, everything shifted. The barriers of misunderstanding began to tumble down like a set of old, rusty gates. Instead of just a soldier, he saw himself as someone worthy of connection, someone deserving of friendship and love. As the crowd continued to celebrate, Daniel took a deep breath. He asked, taking a step closer, hands trembling slightly. Emma's expression softened, her vulnerability shining through. "Yes, please," she replied, a heartfelt urgency behind her words. They moved to a quieter corner of the cafe as the celebrations began to fade into the background. The noise bubbled behind them, laughter mixing with whispers, but here, in the small space they carved out, it felt like they were finally breathing again. She asked gently. He felt the tug of sadness seep back in. "I didn't want to pull you into a dark place. But it has changed, Daniel," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "We've both changed. That doesn't mean we can't find our way back to each other." He looked at her, searching for the sign that she still cared, that the bond they had forged with laughter and shared dreams wasn't broken. "It feels so dark sometimes," he said quietly, emotion heavy on his tongue. "It's okay to feel that way," she replied earnestly. "You're allowed to feel lost, especially after everything you've been through. You're not alone in this." The sincerity of her words struck deep. How could he have forgotten that? They had been there for each other through thick and thin, always searching for that light amidst the chaos. Just then, a familiar warmth enveloped him. His thoughts stumbled upon memories of their past, the late-night talks, the endless support through etched-up moments of vulnerability. Daniel had locked those memories away, trying to shield himself from pain, but perhaps it was time to breathe life back into their connection. He asked, his voice steady but vulnerable. He didn't want to lose her again. "Reconnect. Always," she said, and those words hung in the air, a promise spoken between two hearts. As they exchanged stories in the heart of the cafe, Daniel felt the weight of the world begin to lift. The past might still linger like a shadow, but together they could find a way to brighten it. With every shared laughter and every bittersweet sigh, bonds that had grown frail began to tighten again. Within those walls of the cafe, they paused to reflect on the journey they had taken together, traversing burdens laced with uncertainty and fear. As they spoke, Daniel realized that Emma was still the person he could lean on, a beacon of light guiding him from the dark. He felt alive again, surrounded by camaraderie and shared vulnerability, even amidst the weight of his memories. In that moment, they knew they were ready to embrace whatever lay ahead. It wouldn't be easy. Healing rarely was, but together they could navigate the uncharted waters of uncertainty, hand in hand. As they left the cafe, the sun began to dip low, sprinkling the world with golden hues. It was a new beginning for both of them, a moment steeped in hope and gratitude. Daniel felt lighter than he had in weeks, filled with a burgeoning promise that life could be beautiful once more. With every step, he and Emma walked into the evening, forging a path that was no longer lined with shadows but with the warmth of shared experiences. Their struggles did not define them. It was the love, the friendship that would carry them through. In that journey forward, they chose to honor both the laughter and the pain, for together they could conquer it all. The distance that once loomed so large had shrunk in the face of connection and understanding, reminding them that each moment could shine brighter than the last. And with that, they embraced the night, ready to face a future filled with promise, holding onto each other in the chaos, while forging a bond that would not be easily broken again. The cafe door swung open, and everyone's chatter faded into a whisper. In walked a group of military personnel, their presence commanding attention, their uniforms crisp and neat. Among them was Tom, a sergeant just back from overseas. He felt the weight of every step he took, not only from his gear but from the emotional burdens he carried. He scanned the room, hoping for a friendly face, a flicker of recognition that would bring him back to life even for a moment. His heart dropped when he spotted her Sarah sitting at a table near the window, laughing with her friends. The warmth of her laughter used to wrap around him like a favorite blanket, but now it pierced through him, a reminder of their fracture. He took a deep breath, willing himself to move, to reach out, but he hesitated. What had once been a bond filled with promises and hopes now felt like a distant memory. They had shared everything: dreams, secrets, countless late-night talks, but after he left for deployment, the silence stretched between them like an unbridgeable chasm. Tom turned away, heading to the counter where the barista greeted him. She said, her cheerful tone feeling like a dagger in his chest. He ordered a coffee but hardly heard her reply. All he could think about was the way Sarah hadn't looked his way, the way she seemed to have forgotten him, while he had fought to remember everything they had shared. As Tom waited for his drink, he felt the edges of his world starting to crumble. He had spent the last few months in the chaos of war, only to return to find that the most important person in his life had ignored his existence. Anger and sadness swirled inside him, a tempest of emotions that threatened to spill over. Then, just as he was about to turn and walk out, a commanding voice boomed through the cafe. It was the officer leading the group who had entered moments before. The room quieted, anticipation crackling in the air. "We are here today to honor a soldier among us," he continued, his words strong and clear. Tom could hardly process the officer's words, the applause that erupted feeling surreal. Eyeing the crowd, he saw Sarah's reaction change. A mix of surprise and admiration washed over her face. For the first time, her gaze was focused solely on him. The laughter that had once filled her spirit faded away, replaced by something deeper, more respectful. But as she stepped out of her group of friends, trying to get a better view, Tom felt the weight of their past hang heavily around him. He had wanted to come home and feel welcomed, but how could he when he felt so lost inside? The officer continued, detailing moments from his deployment, brave acts that felt foreign to Tom, like they belonged to someone else. Moments he had fought to carry alone now became fodder for public admiration. Each mention of valor felt like a stinging reminder of the darkness he had witnessed, the friends he had lost. Then, without warning, the personnel formed a guard of honor. The movement was swift and practiced. They lined up, creating a pathway that led directly to Tom. The sudden shift in the atmosphere gripped him, making it difficult to breathe. The applause intensified, and he felt every gaze scrutinizing him, expecting him to take the next step. Heart-pounding, Tom stepped forward, each footfall echoing in his mind. He approached the officer, who presented him with a flag, the emblem of his service, a symbol of sacrifice. "Thank you for your service, Sergeant," the officer said, and finally tears began to prick at Tom's eyes. But as the officer stepped back, allowing the ceremony to conclude, Tom felt an urge to find Sarah. He turned, locking eyes with her. Seconds stretched out into an eternity as he wondered what she would say, what she really thought of him. "Tom," she finally murmured, stepping closer. There was a softness to her voice that stirred something deep within him. He shook his head, the lump in his throat growing. I thought you might reach out," she exclaimed, frustration flickering in her eyes. "You just vanished." Tom's heart broke at her words. "I thought you'd moved on too." Sarah pleaded, desperation spilling into her tone. "You didn't have to go through this alone." The emotional weight hung between them, and for a brief moment the world around them faded into insignificance. In the spotlight of that cafe, the glow of recognition breathed new life into their fractured connection. Taking a step closer, Tom gathered his courage. "I don't want to lose you, Sarah, not now." "Then let me in," she urged, tears shining in her eyes. The sincerity in her gaze ignited a flicker of hope deep within him. But just then the mood shifted dramatically. A loud crash echoed from the back of the cafe, shattering the fragile moment. Tom turned sharply, instinctively moving to shield Sarah. A man had stumbled against a table, sending cups flying, but it didn't stop there. Shouting erupted, and suddenly panic swept through the room. Someone shouted, the chaos spiraling into a frenzy. In an instinctive response, Tom moved to protect Sarah, but the noise was deafening. People were rushing toward the exits, a torrent of fear gripping their hearts. Grabbing Sarah's wrist, he pulled her close as the clamor escalated around them. He yelled over the chaos. The way her eyes widened mirrored the fear bubbling inside him. Just then, he caught a glimpse of the man who had caused the disturbance. He was yelling, gesturing wildly, and Tom's military instincts kicked in. This was not just an accident, something was wrong. "Stay behind me," he commanded, eyes scanning for threats. The barista was frozen, her expression a mix of shock and fear. Tom pushed through the crowd, shielding Sarah as they moved toward the back of the cafe where they could find a way outside. Sarah's voice shook, and he could feel her fear radiating off her in waves. "I don't know." He tightened his grip on her wrist, focusing on keeping them both safe. As they reached the door, the shouting escalated, a pulse of panic coursing through the crowd, which pushed against them like a tide. Tom felt adrenaline rushing through his veins as he scanned for any sign of danger, the instincts he had honed overseas kicking into high gear. Just as they reached the outside, more commotion erupted behind them, and Tom hesitated for just a moment, torn between getting Sarah to safety and making sure the chaos behind them was over. Then, without warning, the voice of the man who had caused the disruption rang out again, louder this time. "I'm not going back." Tom's pulse quickened. The tension in the air felt palpable, like a live wire begging to snap. He turned, ready to assess the situation, to act, but Sarah tugged him back. "We have to go." He met her gaze, and a spark of understanding passed between them. They could panic or fight, they could run or stand together. Then suddenly the chaos erupted again, a loud crash, something else breaking. In that moment, Tom felt a surge of urgency. They had to get out, and the world outside felt 10 times more dangerous than anything he had faced before. He shouted, pulling her with purpose, ready to face whatever lay ahead. Neither of them knew what awaited them outside, but together they would face it head-on. As they stepped into the uncertain night, the taut threads of their lives intertwined, holding fast against the tumultuous storm brewing in the cafe behind them. And in that moment, they understood that no matter what lay ahead, they would face it together, bound by the fierce loyalty forged in the fires of uncertainty, ready to write the next chapter of their story, whatever it may hold. But before they could escape into the darkness, the door slammed shut behind them, locking them into a world of chaos that promised to change everything they thought they knew about bravery and love.